again, thank you all for joining us. This is for evaluating your beginning farmer training program. My name is Lindsay Davies. I'm the National Farmer Training Networks Manager at New Entry Sustainable Farming Project, and I'm joined with Allison Goin, Strategic Development and Program Design Consultant. So today, here is the agenda for the talk. We'll do some introductions. I'll introduce what New Entry is and how this webinar is being funded. Also talk about myself, and Allison will introduce herself as well. She'll talk about what we know about the BFRDP program for 2019 as a result of the Farm Bill that came out last year. And then she'll dive into the BFRDP evaluation requirements, how to use evaluation framework to plan your proposal. And I'll talk a little bit about another project that we have starting up to help with evaluation of BFRDP. And then we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. So again, this webinar is hosted by New Entry Sustainable Farming Project. We are a beginning farmer training organization, and we're based in Lowell, Massachusetts, and we help support beginning farmers in several different ways. On the ground here in Massachusetts, we have an incubator farm, and we also offer trainings and resources and workshops to our farmers and potential farmers on the ground. We also have a food hub where we buy from our beginning farmers and other farmers in the area. We also have another area called our national team, and we help to support beginning farmer training programs around the country in several different ways. And one way is by helping to support people applying for BFRDP grants. And so we currently are finishing up our Education Enhancement Team grant to support applicants for BFRDP proposals. And so the goal of this grant is to help inexperienced people apply for BFRDP grants. And the goal is not really to repeat other info that could be found online or to review the basics of the RFA, but to really dive deep and help folks get creative and strategic about how to utilize the BFRDP grant program in supporting beginning farmers. And so we are winding up this project, so I'll go over a few of the resources that we have available to you, and I'll also be sending out after the webinar a list of these resources that you are able to access and use in helping you apply for a BFRDP. And so we've put on several webinars related to this topic of helping folks apply for BFRDP. I was looking through them on our website earlier today. In total, we have 13 webinars on various topics, everything from BFRDP for ranchers and grazers, program design for BFRDP proposals, the application process for BFRDP, adult education theory, and successful collaborations. We've also worked to develop a online self-assessment tool to help you see your level of readiness to apply for a BFRDP. This is a great survey tool to see where you're at, and it gives you information about different topic areas you may not know about yet. We also have an online portal for public questions and answers with answers from BFRDP program staff to commonly asked questions. So again, I'll send out links to all those resources along with the recording of this webinar as well and the PowerPoint from this webinar. So again, my name is Lindsay Davies. I work with New Entry Sustainable Farming Project. I work to support the applicants and grantees for BFRDP and CFP, which is another USDA NIFA grant. I also help to support 2 national networks of beginning farmer training organizations, one for incubator farm staff and one for apprentice staff. If anyone's interested in more info about that, you can reach out to me directly. All right, so I'm going to hand over the presenter status to Allison.
Thanks, Lindsay. Okay, I'm Allison Goin. I'm an independent consultant, and I've collaborated with New Entry for the past 3 years on this National Technical Assistance Project. I have an extensive background in working myself to prepare USDA proposals. I've done 42 proposals to different USDA programs, start to finish, and I've also supported organizations with additional applications and a lot of reporting on BFRDP grants and grants from other programs. So very familiar with this whole process of applying, reporting, managing, and that has been my role in sharing that expertise with this project. So like Lindsay said, this is our last webinar, but we do have quite a few on file for you. So just a refresher on what is BFRDP. If you've enrolled in this webinar, you probably know, but it stands for Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program. This is a grant program funded by the Farm Bill, and it's under the USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture, NIFA, and that is a research arm of the USDA, and they handle a lot of different grant programs, and most of them are focused on research. And you might see this acronym NIFA in the news right now because there's some debate about their headquarters being moved. So Secretary Perdue has said that he wants to move NIFA out of DC to another location. So there's a lot of news coming out with that. So that is the department that manages this grant. The program is focused on education, mentoring, and technical assistance for beginning farmers and ranchers. Again, the USDA's definition of beginning is up to 10 years of experience. So it's quite a broad definition of a beginning farmer or rancher. The purpose of this program is to support farmers and ranchers with business success. And so they really talk a lot about creating successful and sustainable farm businesses. They really want people who are farming for a business. It doesn't have to be their only business. Maybe somebody on the farm has another job. However, there is a distinction here between farm business and gardening programs or community gardens, other kinds of work in the food system. They're really wanting to go for, farmers who are farming as a career and as a business. With that said, there's a lot of topics that are approved for curricula, technical assistance, and they do even talk about helping people who want to get into farming as a business get to that point. So you don't necessarily have to be making a profit from farming yet, or the people you serve don't, as long as the intention and the trajectory is that you're heading in that direction. And these key areas of priority are not changing this year. This is going to stay the same. In fact, it's going to stay the same for some time now because, well, we'll get to that. So what do we know about BFRDP moving forward? The new Farm Bill came out this year. BFRDP program was awarded what they call permanent baseline funding. It's a little bit confusing how they define permanent. It seems to only really guarantee 10 years of funding, but yeah, so it's considered a permanent program. It doesn't have to be renewed in every Farm Bill, but the funding streams are only guaranteed for 10 years. So a little government confusion. They have created a new umbrella program called the Farming Opportunity Training and Outreach Program, FOTO. So this, I think, could be even more confusing because this FOTO program is actually kind of an umbrella program, and the BFRDP program is going to be underneath or a part of FOTO, and so is the 2501 program, which has also got a longer name about socially disadvantaged farmer assistance, technical assistance program. So these two programs are going to be underneath FOTO, which FOTO has been awarded certain levels of funding. Unfortunately, so the good news is permanent baseline funding, BFRDP is going to continue. Bad news is that because of the way that they're doing the funding levels for FOTO, they're kind of evening out the funding in the two programs, which means that the beginning, BFRDP is going to actually have less funding for the first 2 years, but then it will increase, get back to its current level, and then surpass its current level over the coming years. But $5 million less in the first 2 years, so it's going to be even more competitive. So another good reason to be working on all of these things and make sure that your proposal is really, really strong, because you're going to have lots of competition for less funding. However, they have said that they are working on the RFA, which is the request for applications, or, you know, if you've worked on other grants, you've maybe seen RFP. Once the RFA comes out, we'll have about 60 days to get applications together before the deadline. So now is the time to be working on this. The NEFA website right now says that the RFA is projected to be released in April. There's no specific date yet. We don't know how close to that mark they will make it, but it's definitely in process and it's going to be out soon. So just to put some fire underneath those of you planning to submit an application, get going, because once the RFAs come out, you really don't have enough time to put together a quality proposal. It seems like a long time if you've never done a federal grant, but if you have, you know that there are so many pieces to these projects that you've got to get started ahead of time. So in addition to keeping the general focus areas for BFRDP, they are adding some new emphasis areas, and we don't have a lot of detail yet on these. They will hopefully be spelled out more in the RFA, and I don't believe that any of these new focus areas are necessarily required, but they are just new priorities that they've included, I think based a lot on stakeholder feedback that they got during the Farm Bill process about what the needs were. So food safety, with the new regulations that are implemented this year, that's become a new focus area. Record keeping, they've added this piece about retiring farmers and farm succession planning. I'm sure given the data about the aging farmer population and how much of the farmland is getting ready to change hands. Farmland access, chronic issue for beginning farmers. And they're also expanding the types of EET projects that are available. We'll talk a little bit more about EET a little later. This is a track called the Educational Enhancement Team track. These are national projects. So this project that New Entry and I are doing together is an EET project. These are pretty large-scale projects. So unless you're working nationally in this field, this probably isn't going to apply to your work. In terms of requirements, the one thing that we've been told is that there's an added emphasis on farmer involvement in project design and implementation. This has always been a requirement of BFRDP, so I'm not exactly sure how they're going to add emphasis to it. Maybe it will be weighted more heavily in your proposal evaluation, but they've always asked for farmer input into your project and feedback, and now I guess perhaps part of the added emphasis would be on farmer involvement in implementation, maybe using farmers as trainers, or I'm not sure what else. Maybe they will give us more examples in the RFA. If you go back to, I think it was maybe our previous webinar, we did another webinar where we did talk about ideas for how to get farmer input into your program. So that's a possible resource for you if you're wondering how to do that. They've added a waiver for the match, which is really, could be very beneficial for smaller projects. This is for organizations that are either working in what's considered an underserved area, geographic area, or are serving a group of farmers that are considered underserved by the USDA, which is usually synonymous with socially disadvantaged, what the USDA has characterized as socially disadvantaged. So the match for this program is usually 25%. it's going to stay that way, but you might be eligible for the waiver, which is cool. The funding levels are the same. The funding cap is still $250,000 a year for the large grants and $100,000 a year for the more standard size grants. The indirect rate is still capped at 10%. So this is all new. If you're new to this program, this language may not make sense for you, but just know that a lot of the things are going to be the same. They are offering, though, a streamlined option for projects that are requesting under $50,000. And I don't know if that's under $50,000 a year or $50,000 total. Usually BFRDP is for up to 3 years, so that's not quite clear yet. However, if you're a smaller program, they're going to offer an easier option. And I think this is really great, especially if you're new to this program, because USDA applications are really cumbersome. So the fact that they are trying to make it more accessible for smaller programs is super helpful, and I think they are also going to streamline some of the reporting requirements in that category as well. So this is pretty much all we know right now. However, NTAC, the National Sustainable Ag Coalition, has said that they will host a detailed webinar once the RFA comes out. So keep an eye out for that, and we might even be able to alert you on the listserv for people who have signed up when that's happening. So things you can do now, or just next steps after this webinar, is make sure you're registered in SAM, the System for Award Management, and grants.gov. These are the two federal systems that you have to be actively registered in to submit any federal grant request. The grants.gov process is actually pretty quick, but the SAM process can take a couple of weeks. They're now requiring that you submit a notarized letter from the head authorized person at your organization, and so you have to get that into them by mail, and they have to process it and things like that. So you got to get started on this now if you haven't already. Then once you're actively registered, they stay active for a full calendar year, or I think it's actually just 12 months from when you actually register at any point. So you have a year before you have to do it again. You can go back and review all the resources that we've put together, which, as Lindsay said, are extensive and I think extremely helpful if you're serious about an application. Start planning your project, talking to your partners, revisit our webinar and collaborations. The collaborative piece is also a requirement of the program that's not changing. They want all projects to be collaborations between multiple organizations, and collaborations are one of the more time-consuming parts of the application and also of managing your project. And so it's really important to plan ahead for these collaborations to make sure you have very clear agreements with all of your partners to understand roles, particularly if you're going to share funds at all through a sub-award. That stuff can take time to negotiate and get clear, so you can do that. And then we'll just keep an eye out for the RFA to be released and NSAC's webinar. So the topic we wanted to just go a little bit more in depth on today is evaluation. And it may seem to be a little bit ahead of the game. If you don't have an award yet, why are you worried about evaluation? The reason that we decided to do this is for two reasons. One is so that you're just not surprised once you get your grant, but the other is because the program evaluation requirements really give you a guideline for how to set up your project. And they give you a structure to kind of design the project and also to really fill out the whole evaluation and a reporting section of the proposal. So the proposal itself is going to ask you to explain what you're evaluating for and how exactly you're going to do that. So if you are familiar with what they're going to require from you, it'll make it much easier to answer those questions, and you can use the things that they've already put in place to make this a lot simpler. So we're just going to kind of cover the different reporting systems and some tips, and then we can answer questions. So BFRDP has two reporting systems that they require because they have overlapped between the standard NIFA results system, which is very research-oriented, and then they're also using this new system called RVS, which is the results verification system that is actually hosted at the University of Minnesota, but it's a national system, and a number of different grant programs are now using that. But BFRDP is using both, so it's a little awkward, but it's manageable. The RVS system, I think, is the more user-friendly of the two because it really sets out some clear criteria and it gives you a very limited structure. The structure can be challenging in a way because it's only going to give you certain options, and we're going to go through those. However, I think especially if you're new to evaluation, it does help you to understand what it is you're supposed to do, because if you've never evaluated a grant before, it's really hard to just come up with outcomes out of thin air. The REEport system is the one that is NIFA's in-house system for research projects, and it's more narrative-based, so they're kind of like big text boxes that you have to plug in the narrative to. Unfortunately, these two reports do not use the same questions and categories. They have tried to create some overlap and make it easier for you to take what you put in the RVS system into REEport, but they're not totally lined up, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So a thing to be aware of is that if you get an award or you're notified that your project's been selected for funding, you will be asked to complete a project initialization immediately. Sometimes they don't give you very much time at all to do it, like a week or less. The first place you do this initialization is in the REEport system, and it's pretty basic in terms of your goals and the overview of your project. And if you have a well-organized proposal and you followed all the instructions to put your proposal together, you should be able to basically copy and paste from your proposal into the REEport initialization. But you have to do this to get your award going. So be aware that it's going to come. The RVS initialization comes later. It's usually after the grant actually starts. So for instance, in some years, people will be notified that, well, this is not going to apply this year, but you'll be notified that your award was selected for funding, or your proposal was selected for funding. And you do the REEport initialization. This could happen any time throughout the year, but then your actual grant won't start until, lately it's been the end of August or beginning of September, and then you'll have a couple of months after that start date before you have to get your RVS initialization done. And that's going to be a longer, more time-consuming process than the REEport. However, if you plan ahead, it won't be as bad. So the RVS system, there are tools out there and webinars that walk you through it step by step. And so we didn't want to duplicate that. We will send those to you. This is more to just kind of give you an overview of what these acronyms are, what to expect, and where to go to get more information. So you can go to those guides. It'll show you exactly screen by screen, you know, what you're going to be entering in these systems. If you've ever done a risk management grant, even the regional risk management programs, they use this system, RVS, so you've seen it before. Like I said, I think this process is fairly intuitive and straightforward. The challenge is that they have not fully integrated all the stuff that's in the RVS system into the RFA. So when you're following along the RFA and you're looking at the evaluation outcome section, they don't actually put in there everything that you're going to be asked to report on in RVS. So it really does pay to be familiar with this system when you're doing your proposal. Let's see. So for instance, when you go into RVS, one of the first things it's going to ask from you, and this will be in the initialization part too, is to give numbers for the number of producers who started farming, that you helped prepare to start farming, or that improved their farming success as a result of your program. The last RFA did not explicitly state this. I think they maybe covered 2 of these numbers, but they didn't list all 3 of these. So just know that you're going to need estimates for these. And they do have some definitions for what they mean by helped prepare to start farming in their outcomes guide, which we'll send to you. I think the basic thing to know here is just that there are a lot of different sources of information and these different programs that you should be familiar with and know they exist, because the RFA has just not spelled them out very clearly in the past. So that's our purpose here in covering all of these. One just best practice that I've learned from experience is that when you do your project initialization form and you're entering in all these different numbers for producer outcomes and things, keep really, really detailed notes for yourself and your colleagues on how you calculated the numbers for each one. Because what will happen is a year is going to go by and maybe you'll have staff turnover. Even if you don't have staff turnover and it's just you're going to have a hard time remembering, oh, when I came up with 30 people started farming, was I counting the people farming in the next county or just in my program? So just write down exactly how you came up with every number. You'll really thank yourself when you get to the report. So more on the RES system. The outcomes or results section is in a chart, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. And they have these preset categories into which you put all of your results. And they have these results defined as what producers, which is farmers that you serve, will understand, develop, decide, or implement. And they have very detailed definitions for what each of these words mean, and all that's in their system and in their help guides and all of that. And then it's going to ask you for an estimated number of producers and then also how you're going to evaluate that. So let's look at the chart here so this is easier to understand. So this is one line from what this chart, the outcomes chart, looks like in RVS, and this is from a real project. So what it does is it prompts you, it'll give you a box or a pull-down menu for each one of these categories. So you have to enter each thing one by one, which can be a little time-consuming, but at least you know exactly what they want from you. So say our result is farmers who attend a training session will gain new knowledge or skills in a farm-related topic area. The topic is in a drop-down menu, so you're selecting from their menu. The producer action, again, is from their drop-down menu, just like I was saying. And they're asking you when you're going to measure this result. So in this case, we said at the end of each session or training, class. The estimated number is the total number of farmers that we think are going to achieve this result over the entire 3 years of the project. The actual number, this is when so in your initialization, you'll just have your estimate. In your actual report, which is your annual report, you'll have the actual number that you reached. And then how verified is your evaluation method. So this chart is not in your application, but it's really helpful to know that this is how you're going to organize it. And I actually think you probably could put things into this format in your application in the evaluation section as well, just to make it easier for you later on. In terms of identifying your results too, there's no limit on how many you can have, but to make it simpler for yourself, really it should never be more than a dozen, and that might even be too many. It doesn't have to be a ridiculously long list. You want it to be manageable, and each result should correspond to something that you're planning to do. So it should go right along with your work plan that's in your proposal. That's going to lay out all the activities of your project. If you look over your activities, you should easily be able to extrapolate from each activity okay, this should be the potential result of that activity. Again, don't go overboard and make it too ridiculously detailed, because it's just going to make it more work for you down the road. As long as you're getting at the main things, the main results, the main activities, you should be fine. So again, you know, the way that they define producer actions, these are the words that they use that come right out of their online tools. You know, if producers understand something, they develop something like, you know, a plan of some kind, they decide to take an action, or they implement. Now you can imagine that implement is really the most difficult for most organizations to measure, because it often involves some kind of long-term follow-up or follow-up past when you actually have a farmer in front of you. So it's a little bit harder to get things in the implement category, but you definitely want to try to hit at least one and try to put in place a plan for follow-up phone calls to participants, or a follow-up survey, or just some way that you could try to measure a longer-term impact. In some cases, it's really going to be impossible, but if you think about creative ways to try to do that, it will strengthen your proposal. Okay, so the REEport system, this is the in-house reporting system for NEFA. Like I said, it's very research-oriented, and it's been traditionally, NEFA has funded almost all academic institutions other than a few programs like BFRDP, and so the language is very academic and research-oriented, so some of it's going to seem very strange if you're a nonprofit, and a lot of it you'll just be able to ignore. There are, though, these kind of narrative text boxes, and those will make more sense to you. There are also character limits on the text boxes, which they don't tell you right away, so make sure you look carefully at each box. I think it was like 8,000 characters for each one. While there's not a direct correlation in the actual narrative questions from RVS to REEport, what they have done to try to make this easier is that they have set up in RVS, there's a button where you can export your whole report into a Word document, and then you can cut and paste from that Word document into REEport. However, you're going to have to do some critical thinking about which sections of your RVS report you're going to put in under which questions in REEport, because they're just not exactly the same. I have raised this concern to the BFRDP program staff, and they're aware of it, but to my knowledge, they have not been able to line those up yet directly. So working backwards from the report, I mean, again, if you don't have a grant yet, you obviously are not doing your evaluation or your report, but you are going to need a plan for this stuff in your application. And the better thought out your evaluation piece is, the stronger your application will be. And in the past, they have really encouraged outside evaluators. I do that as a consultant, where I'll work with organizations on the evaluation. There's a lot of people nationally, I'm sure, that do similar things. You can do that, or you can use your own staff, but they do generally look positively on using an outside evaluator, and they often say up to 10% of the budget as a guide would be for evaluation. So that's an option. You definitely are going to keep detailed records of how you calculate all your numbers. And again, just knowing these requirements, while it might seem a little overwhelming, it's better to at least have a basic sense of what to expect, rather than being surprised later on, so that you're not unprepared and scrambling. And like I said, just be aware that the RFA may not exactly match what's in these reporting systems, which is frustrating. However, the first thing you want to do is meet everything that's in the RFA. So when you put your proposal together, you absolutely follow word for word what's in the RFA. And then you can add in things that you glean from these other reporting systems or that have helped you structure your outcomes. But the first rule is always to do what it says in the RFA, because that's how you get funded. And if you don't follow the rules, you will accidentally eliminate yourself, which would be very sad. Other tips for savvy applicants. NSAC they had an EET grant, and they did a BFRDP wide evaluation where they looked at a number of funded projects, and they pulled out the best practices that these different projects used and some other useful data. It's a good source of information. I highly encourage you to read it. We'll send it out. It's also on the new entry page for BFRDP. There's this other system called farmanswers.org, which is basically a database of all the funded BFRDP projects and reports. And so when you submit your reports, they go into farmanswers.org, and they also will ask you, so if you design a new piece of curriculum or you have some new tool or something like that, you share that with them. They'll post it on farmanswers.org. And you can search there so that you don't have to recreate the wheel if somebody else in the country is doing something very similar to what you're doing. But it's a good way to just kind of get oriented to what reports look like and what other people have done. Like I said, this new streamlined option for applicants under 50,000 is supposed to have simplified reporting requirements. I don't know what that will look like, but if you're feeling like this is all just too overwhelming, you could go for a smaller grant. Okay, I'm going to pass this on to Lindsay now to talk about their evaluation project.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me, Allison?
Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome. I had a few notes from folks when I was giving my little intro that they had trouble hearing me. So I had my headphones on and I was trying to talk through those. So I took those off. But just do a little recap about what I said at the beginning of the webinar. Basically, we have an EET Education Enhancement Team grant to support BFRDP applicants. And we have a host of resources available on our website, which I'll be sending out after this webinar, of other previously recorded webinars. We have an online FAQ portal with frequently asked questions from folks about the BFRDP application process. And we also have an evaluation that you can take to sort of see where you're at, if you're ready and applicable to apply for a BFRDP, that I think is all really useful info, and I'll send that out again after the webinar. So again, we've mentioned this. Oh, someone just said I sound much better. Good, I'm glad you could hear me. So wanted to talk about our current status with helping folks with the BFRDP program. This grant, like we mentioned, is currently ending. This is the last webinar of this series, but us at New Entry are still going to be helping with BFRDP applicants and grantees in a slightly different way, and so I wanted to introduce that at this webinar, and I'll send out more info about this as well in the follow-up email. So we have a new BFRDP EET grant, similar structure as this grant, and we'll be working with UC Santa Cruz, Virginia Tech, and ourselves New Entry on this program. And the main goal of this grant is to help beginning farmer training organizations who have BFRDPs do better evaluations of their program. And so basically helping folks conduct better evaluations that clearly document their program impacts. And so as a result of doing better evaluations, programs will be able to identify and also respond to the needs of the farmers that they're working with and able to improve the programming that's taking place. So this will also help to increase the participant success and also provide a level of accountability for these beginning farmer rancher programs. And like I mentioned, this grant is just getting started, so we don't have all the details fully fleshed out, but just wanted to go over some of the outcomes that we have planned for this project to get you guys excited about it. And then the best way to stay up to date about this grant will be signing up for our listserv. We'll be sending out announcements about what's going on, how you can get involved, and I'll send that out as well. So the main outcomes are to help to create tools and trainings for the most part to help with evaluation. And so the first one is about pathway analysis for beginning farmers. So we're going to be looking into the developmental pathways of farmers, trying to understand how folks get into farming and how they progress from a new farmer to an advanced beginner, and looking also at the steps along the way of these folks, but also realizing that every farmer's story is very unique and different, and trying to highlight that as well. And this sort of leads into the outcomes list as well for this project. So trying to look at and give examples for folks for what outcomes could be for your beginning farmer training program. And we'll be diving in and trying to come up with sample lists for very specific types of beginning farmer training programs. We know there's a lot of different audiences that you guys focus in on, immigrant and refugee populations, women farmers. You all also focus in on different stages of beginning farmers, some who have no experience with farming, some who are in the more advanced stages. So coming up with outcome lists for those as well. And then also looking at outcomes over time, the short, medium, and long-term outcomes as well of different programs. We'll be also compiling a resource list of different survey instruments and relevant resources, and that will be housed in a resource library, which will be on New Entry's website. We'll also be doing webinars on different topics related to evaluation from experts in the field who've been doing evaluations for a long time, so you'll be able to learn from them. And then also implementing some sort of online learning community, still fleshing out the exact details about how that would take place. But the overall goal would be for folks to have time to communicate and chat with other folks who are doing evaluation for beginning farmer training programs, sharing best practices, discussing strategies for how to do better evaluations. And so maybe that's attached to a webinar. Maybe there'll be a 30-minute webinar and then a 30-minute discussion afterwards, or something along those lines. And again, I mentioned the resource library, which will be on our website, which will have the recorded webinars and the sample instruments that you were able to take advantage of. And again, the best way to stay up to date about this project will be to join our listserv, and I'll send that info out after this webinar. All right, and then just wanted to recap all the resources that we've mentioned and we'll be sending out. The New Entry's website with previously recorded webinars and the resources that I mentioned. There will be, like we mentioned, a webinar with the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition going over the RFA, and I believe there will also be one that NIFA will be hosting as well about the RFA. There are recorded webinars on the RVS system that NIFA has done as well. We'll send out links to that. And then the upcoming project with UC Santa Cruz will also have resources coming in from that too. And here is the contact info for myself, Lindsay, and Allison. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have more questions. And at this point, we will take questions from you all. So if folks want to type in questions, I did get a few during the talk. We'll go through those first, but feel free to continue. So the first question I got was from Bill. He was asking if the reporting requirements were for current BFRDPs and future BFRDPs. And I told him, yes, that would be applicable to both groups. We may also want to add, Allison, maybe add that with the new RFA, we may see some differences in the reporting. What would you say?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we might see some slight differences, but I don't think there's any plans to really change from using these two systems that we covered.
Great. And then Ingrid had a question. So when you were showing the RVS sort of chart, she was asking if those numbers that were in there, you had an estimated number and an actual number. I was wondering if those were from a real example.
Those were, yes.
From a program that you've worked with? You don't have to tell us which one. Okay. And then, oh, Ingrid was wondering if we could go back to previous slides. Yes, we can, Ingrid. Is there a particular slide? Let me see if I can unmute Ingrid and she can tell us what she's thinking. Hey, Ingrid, I unmuted you.
Hi, thank you.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if I could go back to previous slides personally, because on my screen I see like the buttons, but they're disabled. Like I can't go back.
Yes. So I'll send out the PowerPoint after this webinar. Only Allison and I are able to change the slides right now, but we can go back to one right now if you have a particular question about it, or you can wait and see the slides afterwards. Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah, it's okay. Just about my other question about the estimated and actual numbers then.
Mm-hmm.
Those were very large numbers, so that means there's a beginning farmer rancher program out there that is serving that many people. Is that per year or 3 years? That's a lot.
Yeah, so that was 3 years. It was a total over 3 years, but the reason that particular program has such high numbers is because they host a conference every year. So they have a large conference, but that's definitely not, indicative of the requirements. You don't have to be reaching that many farmers to have a good application.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask next, because I'm with a nonprofit and we're very small in Southern California, and so it's just not realistic for us.
No, that's a great question.
Thank you.
It definitely depends on the type of programming you're doing. If you're doing webinars too, like for these numbers that we'll submit, they're a little bit larger because we're able to reach a wider audience, as opposed to doing, in-person trainings as is a different subset of people.
Right. Thank you.
Yes. All right. We've got several other questions coming in. These are all fantastic. Thanks, guys. Bonnie is asking, explain the 2501 funding. I feel like that's kind of a broad question. Let me see if I can unmute her. Hey, Bonnie, are you still there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Welcome.
Yeah. So I've been working with, in our city, in our county, we have a large refugee population, and I've been working with a community of 3,000 Somali Bantus. And since November of 2017, and we're getting structure, setting up. They want to have a community farm, not an incubator. And we think we have some land that the farmer is willing to let us farm for 2 years rent-free. And I've never heard of this 2501. I've had RME grants before, so I'm familiar with the RDS site. That doesn't scare me, but I never heard of the 2501. So if you can send me some place to do some research, it sounds like something I might go after.
So you could go to, we'll send maybe we can send a link, Lindsay, but if you go to the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition,
Okay.
NSAC, NSAC, if you go to their blog, they have all these posts that go in depth on the different programs. And if you look under that photo, FOTO, which has the BFRDP and 2501 underneath it, you could start there, and it'll give you the full name of the program and some links, and you can follow
Great.
along.
Thank you so much. This was fabulous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Bonnie. All right. We have another question from Jeff. He's asking, do we have any well-written proposals or reports that include evaluation plans that we could share as examples? Well, I do know. Oh, go ahead, Allison.
Well, I was just going to say we don't have a proposal, or I don't know of one, but the reports, like I said, are all in that farmanswers.org. So you can read every report that's been submitted from BFRDP for the past few years in their online database there.
Yes, that was going to be what I mentioned too. Do they talk in there about their evaluation plan?
I mean, they'll talk about how they evaluated things, most likely, or the methods used, but not the plan per se.
Okay. But that's a good place to start, definitely. All right. And then I think Karen has a question. Let me see if I can unmute her. Karen, did you have a question? Oh, maybe she's already logged off. All right. Does anyone else have any other questions they would like to bring up? All right, great. Well, thank you, Allison, for being with us today, sharing some great knowledge, and thank you all for being here. Again, look for an email from me. I'll also be sending out a survey to get your feedback about the webinar, which we'd appreciate if you could fill out as well. So thank you all, and good luck on preparing your proposals.
Yeah, and I'll just say, Lindsay, to that, thank you. And also that, you know, as we go into getting ready for the RFAs, I am still taking organizations for applications in my private consulting business. So if you're looking for help with your proposal or with reporting down the road, feel free to get in touch with me.
Yes, definitely. I'll include your email in the follow-up email as well, Allison. Allison is a great resource. You guys should definitely use her if you're able. Oh, wait, Allison, are you still there? I see Karen's question now. Sorry. So Karen's asking, does this grant typically include funding for direct aid to farmers? I would say no.
Direct aid, yeah, I would say no. I don't know what kind of aid you mean, but not really.
Let me see if I can unmute her. It's not showing up as an option to unmute her. I'm sorry, Karen. It's nothing personal. But I would say no, the grant program is to support the training of beginning farmers, not to provide direct aid to the farmers. And then there was another question, but I feel like we've already answered that with one of the other ones that came in. So,
I have a question.
Yeah. Who is this?
This is Ingrid. I was wondering,
Oh, great.
I don't know, it's probably out there, but I'm not that familiar with this grant. It's my first webinar. But I was wondering if with this grant there's funding for interpretation, because most of the work that we do is bilingual, English-Spanish. And so if we can fund the interpreters for the classes, like we have our interpretation headset, you know, but if, I don't know if there's available, or if money from this grant could be spent that way, like to pay interpreters.
Yes. Yes, you could use some of your grant money to pay interpreters, and I've seen a number of projects that do include interpreter expenses.
Oh, okay, great, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us, and best of luck.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you, Allison.